One of my most watched videos from last year was the one where I tested image stabilization on or off on a tripod. So I wanted to go back and redo the test, and this time I wanted to really control the environment, really control what I was doing without any possible issues with the weather, with wind, with the heat, or anything else. So I came to my garage where it's going to be nice and cool. I've got my camera on a tripod. We're going to be photographing one simple thing that doesn't move at all. So no waterfall, no wind, no issues with anything else. We're going to be photographing the wheel of the car and that license plate right by it that's got numbers. We're going to be shooting, as we do the test, we're going to shoot at f8 and we're going to simply focus. We don't have to worry about depth of field, don't care. We're talking about, does image stabilization on, does it cause the image to be blurry? So we're going to test this with my 16-35, my 24-105, and a 100-400 lens. In the garage, nice and cool. We don't have any heat artifacts because last time I did this test, and I'll link to the test above if you haven't seen it yet. The last time I did the test was in summertime, and when I was shooting at those longer focal lengths, there was a lot of heat through the atmosphere because it was the middle of the day and it was really hot, and I was shooting through a lot of atmosphere. It's not going to be the case today. So we're really going to be able to see if putting your camera on a tripod and turning image stabilization on or off makes a difference. Now, I looked this up on Sony's website because I was so conflicted after reading all the comments that you left on the video. There was a lot of people that said it matters. A lot of people said it didn't matter for them. Other people was like, it absolutely makes a huge difference under specific circumstances. So I really wanted to put my camera through all the tests again in a controlled environment. I'm going to be using a timer to release the shutter. I'm going to be using a cable release to do the timer, and I'm just going to actually push my finger to release the shutter. We're going to do all three of those to see if there's any difference there. Now, I'm not going to bore you with every single shot and me talking it through because I just did that. So I'm going to get busy. I'm going to write down all the shots that I do with the lenses and the settings so that I can remember, the order that I do it in. So I've got everything set up, and let's get started and see what happens. The photos are on the computer, and I'm going to look at them at 100% and 200% just to get us as close as we can. And hopefully you're going to be able to see this. I know YouTube is going to kind of compress some stuff, but I can promise you that when I tell you that if it's bad, I'll tell you. And if I can't tell the difference with my eyes, then I'll say that as well. So I've got these in two different folders. I've got IS off is on top. So theoretically, that should be the best possible quality. And then in another folder below all that, I have image stabilization on. This is the 16-35 millimeter image. So I'll zoom all the way out. So you can see that that is zoomed all the way out, which doesn't really help us too much. We're going to zoom in to 100%. There's 100%. And again, we're focusing here on this license plate and the numbers. And so the first thing we're going to do is let's see if there's any difference between pressing the shutter with your finger, pressing the shutter button with your finger, or using a 5-second timer, or using a cable release. So this is at 100%. We're looking at the shutter, and we're going to click that off, and we'll be looking at the timer. Shutter, and again at 100% I see absolutely no difference whatsoever. Then we're going to take, and now we're going to look at timer versus the cable release. And at 100%, I see no difference there at all. So let's compare shutter to the cable. That's the shutter. That's the cable. I see zero difference there either. So theoretically, the most sharpest, best image with image stabilization off would be the one with the cable release, right? I push the button, don't touch the camera. So let's compare that one. Since I couldn't tell the difference between those three, let's compare that against the three images done the same way with image stabilization on. So here is the cable release is on top. This is the image stabilization off. We're going to turn this layer off, and we'll be looking at the shutter where I pushed it with my finger. There's a slight difference in the white balance I'm noticing. And let's get into the nitty-gritty. Let's go to 200%. That's 200%. We're zoomed in way past what you would be able to see. And again, remember, it's 16 millimeters. It's very wide angle. So those small things you're seeing at 100%, when you zoom in, it's not going to resolve any better. So those little bitty numbers underneath on the license plate here are not going to get any better because there was not enough detail there for the lens to resolve it at that wide angle. So what we're looking at is everything that looked sharp before. Again, this is with the cable on, the cable release and image stabilization off. I'm going to click this. Now we're looking at image stabilization on, and this is with me pushing the shutter with my finger. And let's take a look. And besides the color balance, the white balance being slightly off, and I had it on auto white balance, so that explains that. I'm not seeing any difference in the sharpness of the image. So let's do this. Let's take and compare the cable release to the self timer, 5 seconds. This is the image stabilization is off. This is what we're looking at. Should be the best quality because it's on a tripod, right? And I'm clicking it back and forth. And 200%, I still cannot tell the difference. Let's do one more. Let's look at the cable release versus cable release. Not touching the camera at all. This should be as good as it gets. This is IS off, IS on, IS off. Now there is a pixel movement. I did auto align these images, but I think what we might be seeing is the pixels shifting to the right. Yeah, that's what that is. Again, we're not looking at that movement of the focus breathing. Is probably refocus the image or something, but the camera obviously focus breathed, and it just slightly moved it by like 1 pixel or 2 pixels out of the way. But we're just looking at sharpness, right? And again, I'm looking at the volunteer state, the Tennessee, and the quality of these little numbers over here. This is the cable. This is the cable with image stabilization on now. This is off, should be the best. On, off, on. If there's a difference, it's imperceptible at 200%. If you go to 100%, let's look at it at 100% between the two. And again, we're looking, that is off, image stabilization off and on, off and on. I'm not seeing any difference. So let's take a look at the next example. So this is at 105 millimeters with my 24 to 105. So this is full size. As you can see the whole image. We're going to zoom in to 100%, And we'll look right again. We're looking at the license plate. I think that's the best place to focus. This top layer is with image stabilization off again. This is off. So your best quality should be these three photos. The first one is with me pushing the shutter with my finger. All right, and let's compare that to image stabilization off, but with a 5-second timer. And again, let's look right up here. That is with that layer on or off, on or off, on or off. I see the slightest bit of sharper with the timer, and that's to be expected because when I push my finger onto the camera, I touch the camera, it might introduce a little bit of shake depending on how gentle and how careful I am. So let's take and compare the timer to the cable release. So here's the timer and there's the cable release. Zero difference, absolutely zero difference. So now let's compare the cable to our IS with it on, and this time it'll be comparing it the best quality. Again, the cable release should be our best quality. We're going to compare that against me pushing the button, the shutter button with my finger to trip the shutter. No timer. Okay, so this is IS off. This is IS on with my finger. IS off and on. Off and on. And again, I see just the slightest bit of movement with me pushing it with my finger. In other words, this image is a little blurrier than this one. To be expected. Again, I am pushing the button with my finger. So let's compare image stabilization off, best quality, cable release, with the self timer, 5 seconds. Zero difference, absolutely zero difference. So let's compare it, the cable release, IS off, to the cable release, IS on. Again, this should be the best possible quality that we're seeing here. And let's take and turn that layer off so that we can see image stabilization on. I am not seeing any difference whatsoever, guys. Nothing on a Sony a7R IV with Sony G Master lenses. So we're going to look at one more. We're going to look at the final one. That is going to be the 100-400 at 200 millimeters. So this is our last one. This is the 100-400. This is at 200 millimeters right in the middle. Again, settings are all the same. f8, ISO 320, quarter of a second. So the first image, again, the first group is with image stabilization off. The very first image we're seeing here is me pushing the shutter. Obviously, this is way blurry, simply because at a longer focal length, the physical act of touching the camera and tripping that shutter with my finger causes the blur because there's shake that happens even on a really sturdy tripod inside with no wind on a solid surface. So you can imagine how bad it can get when you're outdoors in windy conditions and your tripod's maybe on unlevel ground or soggy, soggy mud, or it's in a stream and there's water going by. So that's why you always want to make sure you use a timer if you don't have a cable release. So this is obviously awful. So let's go ahead and we'll turn that off. And this one is with a 5-second timer. And this looks perfectly sharp. It's crystal clear. There's absolutely no issues at all with that. Those numbers right here are perfect. We're going to go, this is IS off, the best possible quality, theoretically. And we're going to take the timer layer and we're going to look at the cable release layer underneath it. Comparing the two, back and forth, just rocking that visibility of that layer on and off. There is absolutely zero difference between the timer and the cable at all. If we go to 200%, and I rock it back and forth, and again, I am looking and trying to focus right here on these digits. On, off, on, off. Zero difference. So that being the case, let's say the cable IS off, again, should be the very sharpest, best image quality that we can possibly get. Image stabilization off, cable release. We're going to compare it. We already know. Let's take a look at the shutter with image stabilization on, and it's awful. I really shook the camera when I pressed the shutter. So we're going to take and we're going to just get rid of that shutter, me pushing the shutter button layer altogether, because it just does not work. So we're going to compare the cable release, image stabilization off, to image stabilization on with the timer. And again, watch these digits right here. There's nothing. There is absolutely no difference. And this is at 200%. 200%. Let's go with the cable versus cable release. Man, I am straining my eyeballs out and I cannot tell the difference. No difference that I can tell. So that's the test done a second time in extremely controlled environments with no wind, no water, focusing on letters and numbers, which really help you, at least me, visualize and see how sharp those edges and how legible it is. And I can honestly say, guys, I can't tell the difference on my Sony a7R IV. Now, there's a lot of people that have tested this or tried this with other lenses and other camera bodies and had way different experiences. I can only tell you what I'm seeing and reporting to you guys with what I see and what I've done 2 separate times using the same lenses. And at this time, obviously, I think a better methodology with more controlled environment. So no difference for me. I'm not going to worry about if I remember to cut IS on or off because I can't tell the difference. So hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you learned something, got something out of it. I'd love to hear your comments below, and we'll see you next time.